Two, one. Hello everyone, it's Dr. Rafael Gutierrez, Karate Doctor, and today I'm going to talk about what might happen when your sensei passes away. Now, this is actually a pretty big and broad subject because depending on if your sensei just runs a dojo, teaches for fun on his backyard, or is the main instructor for a big organization, different things are going to happen. Now, I will actually also mention that I did get my COVID vaccine yesterday. And the reason I'm mentioning it is a lot of times people hear the bad news of, really weird side effects. And a lot of those actually apparently are not necessarily correct. It's things that happen and people put two things together. I have actually talked to a lot of people, over 20 people that have had the COVID vaccine. The only one who has had a bad reaction was someone who said that there was a redness at the wound site, but it was actually, they took Benadryl, I think it was, and his doctor told him to take Benadryl and it went away. But if you have a redness, remember to talk to your doctor and see why you have that redness. Don't just try to do what worked for someone else. Now, when you're dealing with vaccines, there's actually something people do need to know. One of them is that very rarely do we have live attenuated anymore. Most of these are actually going to be recombinant. I actually had the Moderna one, which is recombinant DNA, and it doesn't have anything live in it. And hopefully it makes, with the second one, I'll be 95% protected. But there are things we actually do have to look at with vaccines. One is, what is the risk and benefit? Now, I'm 46 years old, almost 47. And I pretty much am going to be working with kids. I'm going to be working at university. And so I'm going to be exposed to a lot of people. It makes a lot of sense for me to get the vaccine. If I was 50 years old with high blood pressure and diabetes, again, it would be a reason to get either one of those. It would be a good idea to get it because your chances of getting it, having a bad reaction, are higher. If you are going to be outside with the general public and you don't have a choice on how you're going to react with them, it makes sense to get the vaccine. That's why most medical professionals are getting the vaccines. One of the interesting things that you'll notice is the more people study vaccines as a group, the more that group is taking the vaccine. What I mean by that is this: if you have someone who studied immunology, medicine, microbiology, with advanced degrees, a lot of them will get the vaccine without even asking twice. Now, there are a lot of people who say, well, they're afraid of different things with the vaccines, and one of the most unusual one was someone who told me that they were worried about being tracked. Well, one of the things I will mention, if you have one of these and you're using it, you can be tracked. If you have Facebook, you're being tracked. And some of the stuff people put on Facebook, Jesus, I actually realized that some people, you would know where they live, where they're going on vacation, how long they're going to go, and how much valuables they have in the place. Not quite what you necessarily want to advertise. But like I said, you actually do have to look at the cost benefit, pretty much the risk benefit. And when you do that, most people will actually see that having the vaccine makes more sense. I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about history. Vaccines have been around since about 1800s with a gentleman named Jenner for smallpox. Now, we've actually had an increase of life expectancy almost every year because of no longer having childhood illnesses. Yes, actually having access to clean water is actually a big one. Just sanitation is another one. But all these things actually come with science and technology. If we actually look at most of human history, the average lifespan is about 30 to 35 years. That doesn't mean everyone dies by 35. What I mean is most people are going to die before they reach 35. About half of the population will die before 35. A couple people will actually go on from there. If you watch any period pieces, you'll actually read about how much people died in early age. For instance, if there was a biography I watched on Mark Twain where it talked about how one of his son died from diphtheria. Just a disease we no longer have to worry about because of a vaccine. And so those are actually one of the big things to actually look at is vaccines do help protect your life. There's no argument there. And like I said, if you look at the people who actually study this stuff, medical doctors, PhDs in immunology, most of these people are going to go get their vaccines. In every group, you always have some outliers, but for the most part, you're going to see that. Now, going back to the topic I wanted to deal with at hand is what to do, what happens, what to expect, I guess, is a better way to say it, when your sensei, your head instructor, passes away. Now, I have a lot of books here. I have one by Don Warner about Miyagi Sensei, and he actually talks about how different people have mentioned that they are the inheritors of the style. And he actually makes a good point on why each one is the inheritor of the style. I'm actually going to mention a little bit about Shoshin Nagamine and what happened when he passed away. And I'm going to mention my sensei as well and what happened when he passed away. But I'm actually going to start with Shin and Sensei. The reason is Shin and Sensei organization seems to have actually somehow managed to do everything right. I have a friend, a gentleman who is part of that organization, who was telling me that when Shin and Sensei passed away, even before Shin and Sensei passed away, he seemed to be really hesitant on giving someone the ultimate authority to be the inheritor of his version of Goju-Ryu. And so when he passed away, the people who were part of the organization had to come together, and they decided on rules and how they were going to promote, how they were going to train together, and how they were going to stay together as an organization. Now, he did tell me that before Shin and Sensei passed away, one gentleman had actually left the organization, and he left with Shin and Sensei's blessing. What I mean is, Shin and Sensei said, yes, you want to start your organization? That's great, go for it. But a lot of the people who stayed, they actually seemed to stay together, and the politics, the infighting didn't seem to happen there. I'm not going to mention a lot of other places because I don't feel it's good to talk about the bad, just the good. But I will actually talk about an organization which I have heard about where the head instructor, the head of the organization, passed away. And when he passed away, he had 5 students which were relatively high ranking. Each one of those 5 ended up making his own organization, claiming to be that gentleman's top student and the inheritor of the style. Eventually, with time, those schools do work together, but there's still seems to be a little bit of a rift on how you're supposed to do something. Now, one head of an organization I know about, he ended up setting everything before he passed away. He knew he was going to pass away, so he set up a board, a group of people who were going to be in charge of that organization. He set up a president, and he said, this is a person who's going to be the president of the organization now and when I pass away. And what ended up happening is when he did pass away, the board members actually got kicked out of the organization, as well as did the president. And the organization restarted from zero without those people. Those people ended up forming a new organization. And so the question there is, well, who is actually the person who's leading the old teachers organization? As they both kept the same name going. Now, there are other things that actually have happened. For instance, one of the things that I've actually noticed is there was a gentleman who I also met who had his own organization, and he had actually set everything up so things would there were 3 different groups who had a specific say of something. One person was in charge of the name and management. One person had the main school, And again, the other person was in charge of the board. There was a board together. And when he passed away, things stayed together for relatively, I think it was 2-3 years. And then the three broke apart, made up their own organizations, and things continued there. The sad part is each one of the three groups ended up claiming that they were the real inheritor of the style, and the other two groups were lying about who and what they were. They weren't teaching the style as it was taught to them. And so with that, I'm going to actually step back and talk about people who are not part of a big organization. Now, there are some sensei who really do take hold of the dojo. And what I mean by that is they are the leaders, they are the main instructors, they are involved in the business decisions, and they do everything. And when they die, they leave a vacuum. Now, one group of people who I interviewed, they had actually decided that one gentleman was going to be the person who taught the classes, while the family was going to be involved in the business, and they were part of a larger organization. When that happened, everyone was okay with it until the person they wanted to teach the class said, look, I have a full-time job. If I'm going to be teaching the classes, I need to be compensated for my time. Initially, people said, that's fine. Let's compensate someone to teach classes. But as soon as the money started getting involved, a lot of other people got upset. Some people thought, why should this person make money to teach in the class when they had a higher rank? Or why is this person when the other person was knew the original teacher longer? And so what ended up happening in that school is, again, different people broke apart and made their own school. Some of these people who were actually part of that no longer wanted anything to do with the parent organization. Some of them actually said, look, we're no longer part of the parent organization. We're going to make our own style based on what we know about this. And when I was younger, when I first began karate, I always saw these, well, someone just made their own style. Why? And as I saw things like this happen, I now understand the why. Now, there was another organization I know of where one of the main instructors passed away. And a student was supposed to the student had actually already tested, and had moved up to a higher rank and had been told he was going to be getting a teaching certificate from the style. When the teacher passed away, other students for some reason decided that they didn't want him to get the rank or the recognition, the teaching certificate, and they wanted him to reassess under them to see if he was going to be able to do what the instructor had already filed with the main organization. When that happened, that gentleman actually left, and again, he decided to join another style. Now, the other case, like I said, these are actually the worst case that I've found. The other case that I found was a gentleman who he had actually, again, had tested, had been told rank, and when his teacher passed away, the board of that organization, of that school, not the organization, decided that they didn't know if they wanted this person to have that rank. And so again, you had arguments. This person ended up making their own style and is now teaching somewhere else. So one of the things that happens is sometimes people actually break apart from the organizations for things that they see as unfair. And if you hear just one side of it, that's actually what it seems like. The truth is, as these people did have the payments that showed that they had already paid for stuff, for certificates and everything, it seems that that's actually what ended up happening. Now, I'm going to go on to my organization, which is no real organization. What ended up happening is my late teacher, I will actually start with when I last saw my late teacher. When I saw my late teacher, Sensei, he asked me to fill out a lot of certificates for people who were part of the organizations. I don't remember how many there were. They were for all over the world. And so I filled them out for him in the English. He had everything done in Japanese for them. And that visit I had, he had just gotten out of the hospital, and he hadn't been able to spend a lot of time with me, so I ended up training with different places, different schools. And when he came back, he actually took me and he told me a lot of things that to this day I actually think are important. One of the things he told me is most people do not think of what they're going to leave behind when they pass away. Now, that should have been a red flag that something was off, because it's something that really does tell you where the mindset is. He's actually thinking what he was leaving behind. At least that's the way I see it. He then also told me that I should make sure I learn from everyone and anyone willing to teach me. He made a big point. He said, go, learn from other people. See what they have to offer. See if it makes sense to you. And make sure your karate is your karate. That was actually one of the things that seemed to be a regular thing with him. Your martial arts, your karate should make sense to you. There were other things that he did say to me which were more things I'm keeping to myself for other reasons. But the one thing that I actually did notice is that he seemed to have broken things apart into 3 different things. And he had actually said that one group was going to be the main dojo. His best friend was in charge of the business aspect of it. Well, technically, the person who I always saw him together with was going to be the main person involved in the business aspect. And the other school was going to be the board. So he passed away, and for a year, things seemed to be okay. I would call Okinawa and ask him how everyone was, and everyone was great. And then my father passed away. And when my father passed away, I decided to take a year off and go to Okinawa. I only did spend 3 months there training, but I went to Okinawa, and when I made the trip, I went through the person in charge of the business aspect, when I should say business in quotes, because I don't think there was ever an exchange of money. I think I paid him $50 once for a certificate, and he took me out for a $100 meal, so go figure. Usually it didn't seem with my late teacher that the exchange of money was a big deal. I did give money to the dojos whenever I trained, because I felt that, hey, if I'm going to be training in a dojo, I should give something. But Taba Sensei was one of these people who didn't seem to ask or want me to give him any cash. He liked gifts. It seemed he liked some of the stuff I gave him. Now, one of the interesting things is when I went down, I got a call from the person who was pretty much my contact there. And he told me everything was set up. I had a place to sleep. Where I was gonna train. They gave me the hours and everything. And he told me not to worry, he was picking me up. So a week before I got to Okinawa, I got a call from someone who was part of the organization, who told me that the organization had split up. There were now 2 different dojos, each one trying to teach what Taba Sensei taught. And I didn't quite know what to do, so I figured, well, this has already been set up beforehand. I'm going to go there. Now, the school I actually ended up staying with never said I could not go and train with the other group. But I always felt that it would be disrespectful for me to have them give me a place to sleep and set the entire trip up for me, and for me to say, well, I'm going to go train with these other people too. Especially because the person who always sets us up stayed with one of the schools. And so I did end up going to the other sensei and dropping off gifts, and that was pretty much the extent of the contact I had there. But I stayed 3 months with one dojo. Now, initially, one of the things I actually try to do is I try to stay out of politics. I tried not to say, well, this is this way, that one's not right, this one's wrong. I just pretty much figure everyone should do whatever they could. And then what was interesting is a few years ago, I had someone tell me that I should not claim to teach the style I teach because I was not part of their organization, which I thought was interesting because I found out that person had never trained under my late sensei. their teacher trained under someone else who had trained under my late sensei. And their teacher's certificate was actually one of the ones I had filled out the last time I saw my late sensei. So what I did is, I technically don't belong to an organization. I do go to a school where I train and get ranked from. What I teach what my late teacher taught me to my students, and I do it because of in respect to him, and I tell them the history and why my teacher named certain things and certain things that my late teacher told me, so they understand why and how things are. But for the most part, I've actually managed to stay away from a lot of the politics, and am kind of happy that this is the way I'm doing it. I do think that that's actually the best way for me, and that's one of the things that I would tell you is, when you actually start looking at stuff, when your sensei starts giving you clues that maybe something is about to happen, if he's telling you that people have to look at what their legacy is going to be when they pass away, when they start telling you about, you should actually train with a lot of other people to, always make sure you study with other people to make sure that what you're being taught makes sense to you. When you start seeing that your teacher starts asking you to fill out paperwork, it's time for you to take a step back and see what's the reality, what is actually happening, and actually start thinking what your next move is. You may want to be with one group. You may want to be with another group. You may want to change styles. And those are all personal preferences. But the thing is, it's going to be, regardless of what happens, it's going to be hard. Now, as I actually say all that, I'm going to mention about deaths and families. I mentioned my father passed away. And when my father passed away, my brother and sister did everything they could to make everything easy for me. All I had to do is I had to go to Managua and sign some paperwork because he had passed away in Nicaragua. And that was it. My brother and sister made sure everything was fine, and as far as I can tell, everything was done fair. But families don't always work like that, just like dojos don't always work the way you would want them, especially when the tragedy happens. I have a friend who, when his father passed away, him and his sister actually got in a big fight because of how things were divided. There was another person I know who, when their father passed away, they were actually part of a huge family, and nobody talks to anyone anymore because of hurt feelings, things that were actually done that they felt was not fair to them or fair to someone else. And so the big thing is you can't really, you cannot not change how other people are going to act, but you can actually start paying attention to what's going on in your dojo. What's going to happen if one thing happens, if your sensei passes away, if it's a surprise, where do you really want to go? These are actually important questions, especially if you're really invested in your martial arts, that you should actually take a take a step back and see where you're going to go. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you've got something useful for it. I actually hope you stay safe with COVID, and have a nice day.